For today's critical thought, this is going to be the first of several parts looking at the concept of jumping to go with my second book, a deep design dive into jumping. If you would like to purchase my first book, you'll find a link to that down below, and that's what we in the business like to call a marketing plug. But for the thumbnail for today, there's actually a little bit of a game design riddle there. One of the things is not like the other, and can you figure out what it is and why? I'll give the answer at the end of this piece. But platforming and jumping are considered some of the most recognizable mechanics in a genre in the game industry. Again, everybody at some point has probably seen or played a Mario or a Sonic. And some cooler people have probably played stuff like Super Meat Boy or N++. And it's very easy to assume that making a jumping mechanic or a platformer is a simple job. But there is a lot that goes into it, and over the course of right now I have 3 different videos planned. We're going to talk about some of the intricacies that lie under the surface. And for this first one, we're going to talk about the difference between committed and free-form jumping. And like I said, some of these videos are going to possibly use as reference or supplemental material for my book. But committed and free-form jumping basically form the 2 differing philosophies when it comes to platforming design. And as a developer, you need to understand from basically minute 1 what kind of jumping philosophy you want to use for your game. Committed jumping refers to the fact that once the player's character leaves the ground, you lose any and all control over that character's momentum. And anyone who's played modern retro or even just retro platformers has probably seen examples of this, and we'll have some game footage in a few minutes to talk more. But typically with a committed jump, you have essentially 2 forms of jumping, and that's it. You have a standing jump when the character goes straight up, and then you have a moving jump where the character will jump at a fixed arc forward. And this makes things obviously very simple to design. You don't really give the player control over velocity or speed. There's no difference in height. It's just press the button, character does a fixed jump. Now, the weakness of committed jumping is that it basically locks any and all platforming-based challenges to those 2 sets of jumps, meaning that you can't do too many things without being seen as being overly difficult. Anyone who's played classic games like Ghosts and Goblins, Super Ghouls and Ghosts, they're both kind of the same, and other committed-based platformers knows just how hard it is to jump onto moving platforms. Doubly so if the platform the player is standing on is also moving at the same time. Because you have no control over the character once they're in the air, you need to be able to extrapolate in your mind exactly the distance the player can jump while their platform is moving and whether or not they can hit that secondary platform. And we can of course make things even harder by having enemies moving around. Everybody remembers the Medusa heads from Castlevania, and it can get very frustrating by the fact that your jumping is so limited in that approach. And that's why a lot of developers, and especially we see in the modern era, go for more of a free-form jump, which is where you have control over the player's momentum and velocity while they're in the air. So you've played, well, pick a platformer over the last 20 to 30 years, and you've probably played a free-form one. And the advantage of this is that it gives the player a lot more control over their character, which means that it's a lot harder to misjudge the timing of a jump when you can control that character in midair. It also opens up the door for more creative challenges when it comes to set platforming. Again, everything from N++, Super Meat Boy, Dust Force, you name it, you can get very technical with some of the challenges you want to put against the player. A really great example of this would be from the world of Kaizo, with the numerous Mario-based Kaizo hacks, I want to be the guy, and etc, etc. Now the problem, of course, is that this is a lot harder to program, and there are numerous factors that go into designing a jump. And that goes, I think, a little bit beyond our video. Maybe that'll be either video 3 or video 4. if everybody wants to see more of this. But I want to load up some more footage to talk a little bit more about committed base jumping and how even with the mod error, you can still do interesting things with it. But first, a quick word to our Patreon supporters. And now a quick shout out to the supporters over on patreon.com/gwbicer. So what we have here is Cursed Castalia by developer Locomelito, who specializes with modern retro design games. And for those of you who don't know what this game is emulating, this is of course Ghosts and Goblins. Now our friend over here is based on committed jumping. As you can see, we only have a few fixed angles. Now to modernize the game, Locomelito does allow you a very basic control over our friend here when he's in the air. You may notice it during the video that I will kind of stop almost a little bit short of the jump. You'll see him kind of get stuck for a second mid-air. That's basically a way of the developer adding in a similar or very small micro adjustment. For the most part though, my jumps are committed. And you'll notice that with committed base jumping, that the gaps that are designed are usually kept equal. Now what we have here is what I was talking about in the last part, making committed base jumping with moving platforms. Again, notice that the distance for most of these turtles is equal as he makes those leaps there. I think I make this on my first try, but we shall see. Now there's a little slight micro adjustment in air, but again, what makes committed base jumping so challenging like this is that once I am in the air, that is essentially it. And whether or not I'm going to survive is going to be based on that initial jump. Now, one thing I want everyone to pay notice to, when I leapt onto the vine just while I was on the turtle about 10 seconds ago, I adjusted myself in mid-air. And that is a very smart decision that Locomelito did to give you that slight variance. One of the more frustrating aspects behind committed base jumping when it is solely committed is that you have to make a lot of precise jumps. Sometimes hitting a boss in the right way, other times trying to hit a power-up or something floating in mid-air. And it's very easy to overshoot that when you cannot control yourself. Now, as we're repeating this part again, with Cursed Castalia, we only have a single committed jump. With Ghosts and Goblins, with Super Ghosts and Goblins, you do get 2 jumps that you can perform while you're in the air. They're both still committed, but it gives you a little bit more control and essentially adds in multiple angles for how you jump. Because at any point during that first jump, I can perform a second one, and that opens up the doors to giving you a little bit more variance without necessarily making it freeform. Again, my momentum when I'm in the air is fixed. It doesn't matter whether or not I hold this button down or just tap it. He is only jumping at one fixed position. And this is a great example, again, a game that tries to marry the two between a freeform and a committed system. But typically, as the game developer, you need to decide very early what kind of jumping system you want to have in your game. It's kind of like choosing between Apple and Android, or AC and DC currents. Once you've chosen one, you can't change it, because every aspect of your game is going to be built on that kind of philosophy. And changing it in the 11th hour, basically is going to require you to completely change your game. Now, one thing you're not going to see in this video is that when you're fighting enemies or bosses that are already moving, it's very easy with committed jumping to overshoot that, and you'll jump right into the enemy, which I am sure everybody who is watching this video right now who has ever played a committed base platformer has done at some point in their lives. But we're going to begin to wrap things up for this first part. And if there's any aspects behind jumping you'd like me to cover in a future piece, for those of you watching this recorded right now, let me know, and maybe that will get put into the book at some point. But to summarize, platforming and jumping is built on either the concept of a freeform or a committed base system. Once it's been figured out, you're going to have to balance your game around it. Command-based jumping is the easier of the two. It does require a little bit more balance on the designer's end. For instance, if I know exactly how far my player can jump, I don't want to have almost pixel perfectly length pits for the player to jump, and that was not easy to get out. Wherein if I am off by even just a fraction of the edge, the player is not going to make it. And again, you don't want platforming that is too short, as in I have to essentially extrapolate how early before I reach the edge to make that leap. Now right here, this is another example with those spike balls of just how hard command-based jumping can be. And it turns a lot of games into almost a puzzle of figuring out, okay, if I can only jump like this, how do I get across this challenge? And a section of my book actually talks about this with more of an adventure game style puzzle. But with that said, thank you so much for watching today's Critical Thought. Be sure to check out my first book linked down below, and the second one whenever I get it finished. But thanks again for tuning in, and check back for daily discussions on game design here, and on game wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. Until next time, have a good day. Alright, so the answer to our little riddle, I know some of you will probably say the Goomba, and that is partially right, but from a design standpoint, it is Arthur from Ghosts and Goblins. He's the only character jumping that is based on committed. Mario, of course, can control himself in midair, and I'm sure David Lee Roth has many different ways of jumping, or at least he did back in the day. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed things, be sure to do all the liking and subscribing that the kids are doing these days. Check out our Discord channel linked down below where we hang out and chat game design, and come back later tonight for our regular streamings. But that's it, and tune in for more great content here and on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games.